You know that feeling, right? When you're trying to read something really important, maybe for work or research, or you're just curious, and you dive in and bam, you hit this like wall of text, sentences that just go on, jargon you kind of recognize maybe, abstract stuff that seems to hide the point more than reveal it. You end up reading the same bit 3 times, thinking, seriously, is there no simpler way to say this?
Oh, absolutely. It's so frustrating, isn't it? It really feels like the writing itself is actively fighting you, stopping you from understanding. Even when you know the information is valuable, the way it's presented can make it almost impossible to get through.
Exactly. And that whole struggle, that feeling like you're wading through linguistic mud,
Mm.
that's actually what we're unpacking today. We're doing a deep dive into something our source calls unnecessary academicism in writing.
Right. And our source material for this is the Instagram account Academic Practices.
Hmm.
They put out some really sharp, super practical advice for, navigating research and writing, always delivered in a way that just cuts right to the point. And this topic, it hits home for anyone who's ever had to write a paper or read a report or just explain a tricky idea.
Or honestly, anyone who just wants to communicate better.
Yeah.
So our mission here is to grab those key insights from academic practices on this. We want to figure out what this unnecessary academicism trap actually is. Why do people fall into it, sometimes without even meaning to? Why it's actually, harmful to getting your message across. And most importantly, the practical, actionable stuff, how to strip it away and just write with clarity and impact.
Okay, so let's start right there with the definition. As Academic Practices lays it out, what do they actually mean by unnecessary academicism?
Well, they define it as expressing an idea or a message, or even just a simple finding. Using language that's way more complex or indirect or abstract, or even pretentious than it really needs to be to get the point across clearly. It's the kind of language that doesn't really add precision or nuance. It just adds friction for whoever's reading it.
Friction. That's a good way to put it. It's like taking the winding, bumpy road when there's a perfectly good straight one right there. And they point out some common signs, right? Indicators that show up again and again when someone's doing this.
Like what? What are the red flags we should look out for?
Okay, so Academic Practices points to things like sentences that are just excessively long and complex. The type packed with clauses, tons of commas. By the time you get to the end, you've almost forgotten where it started. Hard to track the main subject and verb.
Oh, definitely. I call those marathon sentences. You feel like you need a break halfway through?
Right. Exactly. And another one is using abstract or super technical terms when, honestly, a simple common word would do the job just fine. Like, why say ameliorate when you just mean improve, or utilize instead of just use? Sometimes the simple word is actually stronger.
Absolutely. And they also mention using jargon inappropriately. Using those specialized terms when your audience won't get them, or maybe trying to sound smart by just sprinkling in Latin or French words.
Yeah, or relying too heavily on the passive voice. Now, sometimes passive voice is needed, but using it too much just makes sentences clunky, less direct, and it often kind of hides who or what is actually doing the action.
And that example they give of an overly elaborate phrase is spot on. The aim of this study, in light of the existing paradigms in the literature, it feels like you're building this huge scaffold before you even say what you're trying to do. Academic practices suggest you could often just say something like, this study aims to, or maybe we investigated. Much cleaner.
Precisely. It's all about being direct. So, okay, we can often spot these things. But that brings up the big question. If it makes writing harder to read and understand, why on earth is it so common? Especially in academic fields or technical writing.
Yeah, academic practices really digs into the psychology here, and it's actually pretty relatable. One big reason they mention, especially for maybe newer researchers or people early in their careers, it's that powerful urge to seem impressive, to impress your peers or mentors or reviewers.
There's this hidden assumption floating around, isn't there? That complexity equals intelligence or rigor. That if your writing sounds really dense, your ideas must be super sophisticated. It can feel a bit like a performance, maybe. A way to signal, I belong here, or I know my stuff.
Totally. It's like putting on academic armor. If my sentences are complicated enough, they'll take me seriously, even if I'm secretly a bit unsure.
And that ties into their second point. Just the habits we pick up during our education. If you spend years reading really theoretical texts, or maybe classic papers that do use complex language and structures, you can just unconsciously absorb those styles. You start thinking that's the standard for serious writing.
We're like sponges, aren't we? We just soak up the styles we see most often.
Mm.
If you're mainly reading dense academic stuff, that's probably what's going to come out when you sit down to write yourself.
Exactly. It just becomes your default mode, your learned dialect almost. And the third reason is connected to that. It's based on a mistaken idea about what the audience actually expects. Academic Practices notes that lots of authors genuinely, though wrongly, believe that journal reviewers or editors want this complex language. They think if it sounds too straightforward, too easy to read, it won't seem academic enough, not rigorous.
Which is completely backwards thinking, isn't it? Because ultimately, why is this kind of writing so harmful?
Yeah?
Academic Practice is really clear about the downsides.
Right. The first big problem is that it just loses the reader's interest. Think about your own experience reading something really difficult. Unless you absolutely have to push through, you're likely to just tune out or skim, maybe give up entirely. And this is true even for academics reading stuff in their own field. Clarity keeps people engaged. Density pushes them away.
It sheds cognitive load, right?
Yeah.
Every unnecessarily complicated sentence is like a speed bump. Eventually, the reader just runs out of steam and pulls over.
Precisely. And second, and this is probably the most damaging thing, if you're trying to share knowledge, it obscures your actual message. Your research could be groundbreaking, your argument brilliant. But if you bury it under layers of confusing language, your reader might just miss the point completely. The signal gets totally lost in the noise.
That's so critical, especially in science or research. If your amazing discovery or insight can't be easily understood by others in your field, or maybe even people outside it, its potential to actually make a difference, to contribute, is just severely limited.
And that leads straight to their third point. It reduces your academic or professional impact. Your whole goal is to communicate your knowledge, your findings, your analysis, whatever it is. If your writing style stops people from easily accessing and understanding that, well, the impact of your work just shrinks. It's like building this amazing bridge, but making the entrance so complicated, nobody can figure out how to get onto it.
That's a great analogy. And for you listening right now, think about why you seek out resources like this deep dive. You want to understand complex topics quickly, efficiently. When the original writing is bogged down in complexity, it makes your job learning, getting informed so much harder. The clarity isn't just nice to have. It's fundamental to actually transferring knowledge effectively.
So understanding the problem and why it happens, that's step one. Step two is, okay, what do we actually do about it? And Academic Practices gives several really practical suggestions here.
Okay, great. Let's get to the fixes. What's their first piece of advice?
It's beautifully simple. Use simple words. Now, they're not saying dumb down your ideas at all. It's about choosing the clearest, most direct word available. They give some great examples. Instead of writing in terms of, maybe just use with. Why say, in exchange for, when in return for, works perfectly. Or swapping is exposed to, for the much clearer, is affected by. Little changes like that.
Those small word choices really add up, don't they? Switching from utilize to use, or maybe implement to do or carry out, it just makes an immediate difference in how easy it is to read.
They absolutely do. Okay, their second practical tip. Avoid unnecessary adjectives.
Ooh, this one can be tough sometimes. You want to show how thorough your work was, right? Impress the reader.
Right, but Academic Practices suggest that loading up the beginning of sentences with lots of descriptive adjectives is often just clutter. Their example is perfect. Instead of starting with something like, in this comprehensive, multidimensional study with a strong theoretical basis, you can often just write, in this study.
Wow, just in this study. That almost feels too simple sometimes, you know?
It can feel that way, yeah. But think about it. The fact that your study is comprehensive, or that it has a strong theoretical basis, that should become clear from the rest of the paper, from the substance of your work. You don't necessarily need to announce it all up front with a pileup of adjectives. Let the work itself show those qualities.
That makes a lot of sense. You're trusting the rest of your writing to do the heavy lifting, not trying to cram it all into the first few words. What's tip number 3?
Express ideas in short sentences. This one's fundamental. Academic Practices really emphasizes one main idea per sentence is usually plenty. Don't feel like you have to string 5 related thoughts together with semicolons and ands and buts. Use periods. They're your friends.
I think there's sometimes a fear, though, that short sentences sound choppy or simplistic, not serious enough.
That's one of those false assumptions they talked about earlier. In reality, shorter sentences are just easier for our brains to process. They give the reader a little space to pause, absorb one idea, then move to the next. It actually improves understanding, even when the information is complex.
Okay, so Short sentences, simple words, cut unnecessary adjectives. And their fourth suggestion is more of a technique, right, for checking your work, the simplification technique.
Yes, and this is a really powerful one. After you've written something, could be a sentence, could be a whole paragraph, academic practices suggest you ask yourself this key question. Is this sentence clear enough for an undergraduate student to understand it on the first read?
That's a brilliant test. It forces you to step outside your own expert bubble. You have to think about someone who's smart and engaged, but maybe doesn't have all the deep background or jargon you do.
Exactly. It sets a high bar for clarity, but an achievable one. And if the answer to that question is no, if you think, an undergrad might stumble here or need to reread it, then academic practices advice is clear. Simplify it. Break it down, rephrase it, use plainer words until you can confidently say, yep, they'd get it first time.
That takes discipline, definitely, but it sounds incredibly effective. And to really hammer these points home, academic practices give some great before and after examples, right?
They do, and they're really illuminating. Let's look at the first one. The unnecessarily academic sentence they use is, this study was conducted with the aim of analyzing multiple factors influencing the purchasing process in the context of consumer behavior.
Pause it slightly.
Sure.
Okay, yeah, that's a classic. Conducted with the aim of analyzing. Lots of winding phrases in there.
Right. Now, compare that to their simplified version. This study examines the factors that influence purchasing decisions.
Wow. Okay, the difference is huge. It's so much more direct, punchy almost. It tells you exactly what the study does without all that extra preamble, like in the context of consumer behavior, which is probably implied anyway.
Exactly. It just cuts out the wasted words and the structural fluff. All the core meaning is still there, but it lands immediately.
Massive improvement. Okay, let's do the second example. The academic version is, in this study, the in-depth interview technique, one of the qualitative data collection methods, was preferred.
Again, it's understandable, sure, but it's got that extra clause in the middle, one of the qualitative data collection methods. It feels a bit roundabout. Now, the simplified version from academic practices. In this study, in-depth interviews were conducted.
Bam. So much cleaner.
Yeah.
You don't need to stop and define in-depth interview as a qualitative data collection method right there in that sentence. Unless maybe that specific classification is the absolute key point you're making in that sentence. The reader probably either knows what an in-depth interview is or that detail belongs elsewhere, maybe in a methods section.
Precisely. It trusts the reader, or trusts that the full context will provide that detail when needed. These examples just perfectly show how much power there is in being direct, in stripping away everything that isn't absolutely essential for clarity.
Now, academic practices as a really timely bonus tip related to AI and writing.
Yeah, this is a great point because AI tools are becoming such common writing assistants now. The potential trap academic practices warns about is this. If you feed the AI really complex, dense academic text, it might just learn from that input and spit out something that's equally complicated, or maybe even more so. It could unintentionally just reinforce the very problem you're trying to fix.
Oh, that makes total sense. The AI is just trying to mimic the style you give it. If that style is overly complex, the AI will just reproduce that complexity.
Exactly. It doesn't inherently know clarity. It knows patterns in the text it sees. So the really helpful tip from academic practices is, if you are using AI to help refine your writing, be explicit about your goal. Don't just say, improve this text. Use prompts that specifically ask it to simplify. Something like, make this text clearer and more understandable, or simplify this sentence for a non-expert audience.
That's a fantastic practical tip. It's about using the AI's power smartly, guiding it towards your actual goal clarity rather than just letting it copy potentially bad habits from the input.
Yeah, it's like being the conductor, telling the orchestra what kind of music you want, not just letting them play whatever they feel like.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, drawing on all these great insights from academic practices, what's the big picture, the main takeaway about avoiding this unnecessary academicism?
I think their core conclusion is really powerful, and it kind of flips that old assumption we talked about. In academic writing, or really any writing where you're sharing complex info, clarity, simplicity, and just basic intelligibility, they are way more valuable, way more impactful than complexity for complexity's sake. The complexity should be in the ideas, in the research, the findings, not in the sentences you use to talk about them.
That distinction is crucial, isn't it? The difficulty should be in grappling with a new concept, not in decoding a tangled sentence.
Exactly. And they really underscore that the whole point isn't just creating knowledge, but communicating it effectively. Science, research, complex ideas, they gain their real meaning, their relevance, their impact when they're made accessible. And clear writing is how you do that.
That's such a profound point. If the value of knowledge really is unlocked through accessible communication, through clear writing, then maybe the final thought for you listening is this. What specific small step could you take today? Whether you're writing an email or a report or just explaining something complex to a friend, what one small thing could you do to make your own ideas just a little bit more accessible?
That's a great question to sit with.